All right, we'll go ahead and get going. Eddie, are you ready to start? I'll start it up here.
Sounds great.
Okay. I'll share my screen. You guys let me know, Eddie, if you can see it. All right.
Looks good.
Okay, super. All right, we'll get started here. Thank you all, everyone that's attending. I'm Jeff Adams. I'm Community Development Director for City of Cannon Beach. And beside me is Karen Labonte, Public Works Director. And we're here representing the city for the City of Cannon Beach Transportation System Plan. This is the second open house meeting that we've held. One day we hope to have an actual open house in person.
Before this is over.
Yeah, before this is over. Right? And if not, after it's over, we're going to have a get together to talk about it for everyone that's been on these calls. This morning we had some technical difficulties. We held our project advisory committee meeting. We had some audio difficulties and problems. But I do want to remind you that all of these will be, like all of our meetings, taped and available on the city's website. And if you want to share these, feel free to let people know that these are available out there, and they can always also check. Let me let a couple other people in here. And they can always check back as well on our cannonbeachtsp.com website. So again, thanks for tuning in. Just a few kind of meeting guidelines before we get started and into the conversation. You can please mute when you're not on. I've muted everyone on this call as they entered, but we'll open this up. I know Jan Siebert-Warman had asked and called earlier about speaking. We'll have a couple points where we'll stop, and pretty much every transition we'll stop and ask for comments. There's a little raise your hand feature. I know that Jan, you're on the phone, so you don't have that opportunity. So I'll just open your unmute you at that point and then let you comment, okay? And we'll do that every time. If I see other phone pop up, I'll do that for them as well. And then if you don't get your chance to comment tonight and you want to just email me, always you can reach out to me at adams@ci.cannon-beach.or.us. And just please let others speak and use the general simple guidelines out there. I want to introduce, like I said, I'm Community Development Director and Karen's Public Works Director, but we have other team members. Eddie, are you the only one from the project team tonight? I think you're still muted. I got to unmute you every time, I think. Okay, there you go.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm the only one on the project team that's here tonight, but my name is Eddie Montejo, and I'm a transportation planner for a company called Parametrics, and we're partnering with the city to develop this plan. So we'll be sharing some information with you tonight. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure. And the TSP context, we're going to go over the work done today, talk about our community outreach. Then the other agenda items are, we'll look at future needs and deficiencies, talk about the draft alternatives and analysis and funding programs, and the next steps. I've already done my introductions for us. And so let's just jump right into the context for the TSP. I want to lead with the bottom thing there on the bullet points. This is Cannon Beach's first transportation system plan. When we put in for this, it was our fourth time we put in for it, finally got it. we were the only community that did not have a transportation system plan in Clatsop County. Many have not just one, but many times updated theirs, working on other TSP projects. We were real happy to get this opportunity to look at the next 20-year horizon on what our transportation needs are and what we got extra funding for and ability to look at even further in detail is our parking situation and really look at those things that impact us as a destination resort seasonal community. So we're assessing the existing and future conditions, develop draft and preferred alternatives, identify the project, programs, policies, and standards, and then funding options and implementation strategies. And so this will be the first time I say this, but it won't be the last tonight. I do want everyone who's tuned in to go to the CannonBeachTSP.com website, go to the materials tab under that, and you'll see all of the information that's being produced by the project management team from the surveys and the results of that. And so we have what I call filtration system. In other words, this is more of a trickle up process. One of the things I think that's important with this TSP is that it's a chance for us to approach our community, ask them what their transportation concerns are, their parking concerns. Then that is filtered through the project management team and our project advisory committee. And then it's filtered on to the policymakers, the planning commission and city council. And then they get to make those important decisions on our transportation needs for the next 20 years. Our community engagement, what I've been really impressed with is how many people have been involved in this so far. The online open house, as you can see from the statistics up there, 161 comments, 271 parking survey respondents for over 400 total. What I also want to impress upon you, even the raw data from that, everyone's comments that were received are now available up there on the website. So if you get a chance, just read through those comments, some great comments that we got back from the public. So we had an online open house of the first one. We ran 2 different surveys and we've held a online open house and a public webinar as well. We've had project advisory committee. Now we've just finished our second one today. And like I said, we got a little extra funding. So we've been looking at the supplemental parking survey, but that also got us some more information where we got a chance to do more traffic counts and parking counts as well. And we'll clue into that here in a bit. But what did we learn through this process? The first part of the process is all about listening and getting the feedback through the surveys. What we heard was they wanted mainly, and from our first survey, was that we needed to do a more specific parking survey. You can see the rank of the top priorities there for the transportation system survey: manage the impacts of tourist traffic, balancing parking solutions, and making it easier and safer to walk around our community. Biking also was way up there. And so where we're at, there was a headline that was last, I think, Cannon Beach Gazette or the one prior that said that we're finishing up or finalizing the TSP. We are nowhere close to that. As you can see from this, we're right in the heart of it. We've looked at our goals and objectives and the existing conditions, and we started looking at the different scenarios and solutions, and that's where we are today. We've done quite a bit of listening. Now it's time to start looking at what we've learned and drafting scenarios and solutions to move forward with. So I'm going to turn it over now to Eddie and let him take on the future needs and deficiencies.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And again, folks, good evening. My name is Eddie Montejo, transportation planner that's been working on a lot of this work. So I'll be sharing everything in two kind of big sections today. The first section being the future needs and deficiencies. After this, we'll talk about the actual alternatives, draft alternatives that we've developed, which will really be kind of the heart of the discussion. So like Jeff was saying just a few moments ago, following up from understanding existing conditions and how the city's transportation system is operating today, the next major step was understanding how that system would operate into the future in order to identify potential solutions. So that's what I'll be covering next. Next slide, please, Jeff. All right, and like Jeff mentioned at the very beginning of tonight, the TSP is really looking at, excuse me, is looking at a 20-year planning horizon. So it's really looking forward to a planning year of 2040 to understand, how the transportation system will operate at that time, what needs and deficiencies this plan might be able to address. For the purposes of our planning and analysis, we talked about this 2040 planning horizon as the no-build condition, which essentially assumes what the transportation system would be like in 2040 if there was no improvements were made from today's existing conditions. So in order to do that, it's certainly not an exact science. So we pulled considerations from a variety of different sources, a big one being, of course, community input, what we've heard to date from community members in terms of what's important to you all for getting around town. Obviously, the effect of tourism is a major driver in thinking about the future and what conditions would be like. We also did some more quantitative research and kind of science-based analysis, and that really lives in that bubble that says traffic operations. So that refers to actually looking at existing traffic, projecting out what traffic will look like into the future, and then making some assumptions about how traffic will operate and what we might be able to do about it. So anyway, the next few slides will hit on some of these bubbles. The first being population growth, which of course, a growing population is always going to be a driver in transportation needs in any community. And the highlights here are just that Cannon Beach, if you look at the 2040 forecast in the top row there, is projected to grow by about 3.8%. And these numbers, by the way, are from the Portland State University Population Research Center. That center publishes population research and forecasts for the entire state on an annual basis. So this was kind of our best data set. If you compare that to the county looks like it will grow a bit faster than the city as a whole, growing 4.6% by 2040. And if you compare it to Oregon, the comparison is pretty drastic. So in 2020, Oregon is at about 4.2 million residents. In 2048, that's projected to jump up to 5.1, representing nearly a 20% jump. So this means that Oregon is going to grow about 5 times as fast as the city, which to us indicates that overall population is probably not going to be a huge driver in future traffic and mobility issues in town. Really, what's going to drive the future of how people get around Cannon Beach, as you probably all know, is tourism. Tourism is easily going to be the biggest impact and the thing that we need to keep at the front of our minds when we're thinking about how to plan for the future system. So that's kind of the key takeaway from this slide. Next slide, please, Jeff.
Yeah, and I wanted to just point out, Eddie, that we did discuss this morning at the PAC meeting, the changes in the, at least from the census data, it looks like we've actually lost population. So, but I think right. Just what it echoes what Eddie said earlier about, the local population isn't likely going to impact those traffic and parking numbers as much as those seasonal influxes.
That's right, Jeff. Thanks for clarifying that. We learned that at our PAC meeting this morning. So in addition to trends like population and traffic growth, we also looked at the system itself, referring to the network of city streets, sidewalks, roadways, all the facilities that kind of come together to create a unified transportation system, and what that might look like in the future. And generally, our assumption was that in the future, the transportation system is likely to be very similar to what it is today. And the reason we made that assumption is because currently there are no planned or funded projects or developments for the city's street system that would dramatically change operations in any way. With that said, there are some planned improvements on Odot facilities. So for example, there are some planned warning signs and speed plaques along the US 101 corridor that I think are planned for construction in 2021, 2022, but nothing in the city proper. So again, we assumed no major changes to the roadway network, and therefore any changes that would occur over the next 20 years would largely be development driven. We made the same assumption for the rest of the transportation modes that we are considering. So that includes bicycles, pedestrians, the state of crossings, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, compliant facilities, lighting, and transit. For all of these different transportation modes, while there may be some plans out there that make recommendations for the city, none of these recommendations are currently funded. So for now, our assumption is that these are unlikely to be implemented in the near term. So that was our kind of starting assumption for what the future transportation system would look like. Next slide, please, Jeff. Great. And getting back to the numbers for a little bit, I mentioned that we also looked at future traffic volume. So if you joined us at our last public webinar, we shared with you some of our existing conditions research, which in part was based on traffic counts that we collected at 15 representative intersections. And of course, we focused on the highest traffic, biggest issue connections in town. So we focused on Hemlock, Spruce, and US 101. And we also adjusted these volumes for COVID, recognizing that when we took these counts in 2020, there was surely going to be some changes in the numbers to a typical year. So we've done quite a bit of research to understand what the impact of COVID has been. And based on all that research, what we've landed on is essentially a linear growth rate that we've projected out into 2040 to at least get a sense for what traffic might look like in 20 years. And like the slide says, that average growth rate that we found was 1.23% per year of annual traffic growth, which if you stretch it out over those 20 years, results in approximately 25% traffic growth over 20 years. Next slide, please. And while those numbers might be interesting for sure, what's more important is what we do with those. So we use those numbers to basically understand how future traffic would operate in the city and what the implications are for things that are important to the community, like flow, delay, queue links at intersections, and safety. So we measured that using a few different metrics. One is volume over capacity, which is a common measure that's used in traffic engineering, which essentially looks at how many cars you have in a given piece of roadway per the amount of cars that roadway can hold. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in the next slide. We also looked at state mobility targets, which are basically targets for those volume and capacity ratios that indicate when a given roadway is congested or not. An important note, however, is although we did apply those ODOT mobility targets, the city doesn't have adopted mobility targets. So I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in the next slide. And the last measure that I'll highlight is level of service, which is essentially like an A through F grading system for traffic flow through a given intersection. And essentially A means free flow conditions, there's no delay at a given intersection, and F being complete gridlock where you can't get through. So next slide, please, Jeff. And to just explain a little bit more about what this looks like, I'm highlighting one example. I apologize there, we did a lot of analysis, and like Jeff said, we definitely encourage everybody on the call to go and look at the full report, look at these numbers for yourself and let us know what you think. But just to give you a sense of how to interpret it, here's an example from Hemlock, and the rows indicate different cross sections with Hemlock. So in the intersection column, there's Hemlock at Second, at First, Gower, and at Sunset. And the next column shows the future no-build mobility target, which again is that volume over capacity sort of threshold that ODOT recommends. You see there that it's less than 0.95. Just so you know what that means, basically a VC or volume over capacity ratio of 1.0 means the facility is at capacity. and anything above 1 means that you have substantial congestion. So basically, anything over 1 is not good. The other columns in the table that you'll see are delay, and that's measured in seconds. So for example, at Hemlock and Second, for mainline operations, meaning Hemlock, you have 10 seconds of delay in the future. For side street operations, meaning for Second Street, you have 245 seconds of delay. So quite a big difference between the mainline operations on Hemlock versus the side street operations. And the last column in those, the last 2 columns in these bigger columns are the LOS, or the level of service, which is again that kind of A through F system. So you can see that operations for Hemlock and Second, for example, are A, which is pretty good, or great actually. And for Second Street, side street operations is an F, which is not good. And the final column in the table is just whether or not future operations exceed those mobility targets of 0.95. And you can see that, at least in this example, there were a few places where we anticipate substantial congestion in the future. So that would be at Hemlock and Second, at Hemlock and First, and Hemlock and Sunset. And as residents, I'm sure this is no surprise to you. Next slide, please, Jeff. So just to kind of summarize, again, what our takeaways were from all of this traffic analysis are things that again, I think the community is already well aware of. The main issues are, for example, high pedestrian crossings, especially on Hemlock and Second, limited stop controls on Hemlock, which are great for preserving through traffic on Hemlock, but actually cause pretty substantial delays for side street operations like First and Second. And because of those side street delays, we also know that there are some safety issues where you have people essentially, waiting, trying to time gaps and rushing across, mixed in with, high pedestrian flows, especially during peak visitor season. Just doesn't make a very safe environment for anybody. So we understand those problems. Next slide, please, Jeff.
And Eddie, I don't know if you want to, Lila's raised her hand. If you want to wait and when we do a transition, maybe speak then, or do you want to go ahead and handle them?
No, I think it's fine to let folks jump on in. So Lila, Jeff, I think you probably have to be the one to unmute her though.
Yeah, I've asked her to unmute, see if she can unmute.
Okay.
Lila? Yeah.
I just have a question. In Tolovana Park, I don't see any analysis of what's going on in Tolovana Park. And I know that we have a lot of speeding and we have a lot of parking issues down here too. So I'm just wondering why that section was left out of the analysis.
Great question, Lila. And just to clarify, we absolutely looked at Tolovana Park. Again, just for the sake of length, there's a lot of material here, so we kind of had to pick what to highlight. But if you'd like, I know Jeff has made himself available to talk more about this offline. I'd be happy to point out some of the key findings in Tolovana Park. And if you look at the full memo, there's lots of information in there and detailed traffic analysis for the intersections in that area. So we are aware of that, and it wasn't left out. So I'm just kind of scrolling through the participants to see if there's any other questions. And again, Lila, hopefully that doesn't sound like I'm kicking the can down the road. It's just, we didn't have prepared findings for that particular segment in town, just because we have so much content to get through. But we can certainly talk about that.
Okay, Eddie. I'll let Jan see if Jan wants to speak now or if she wants to wait, just to touch base.
Okay, I had a few questions, some from this morning. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to understand, just in general, the difference between the morning advisory meetings and then the open house. So there's been 2 sets of 2 different meetings. And so there's an 8:30 a.m. meeting and then a 6 p.m. meeting. And I know the advisory committee is at the morning meeting, but that's also a public meeting, correct?
Right, yes.
Okay, and then as far as asking questions, I guess for both meetings, I think it might be helpful going forward that people would know about both the meetings, and also that there would be a very clear public comment place, or somehow on there that it shows that there is time and space for public comments and questions. I think that might be helpful to get more people to, to be a part of this. Just a suggestion.
All right, thank you, Jan.
One other, okay, thank you. And then another thing, I wanted to ask about this comes a little bit later in the discussion that I heard this morning, but it has to do with the North End bus station, that there is one in Les Shirley Park in the parking lot there that is already it's a beautifully covered shelter with a bench, and a local artist took the mural artwork from the children from the old Cannon Beach Elementary School. That's part of that little shelter. It's centrally located, and I'm just trying to understand, do you mean another one in addition to that one is needed? And maybe you can address that, Eddie, when you talk about that to this tonight's meeting. It's a very, to me, it seems like a very usable station already, and people can easily get there. People can easily be dropped off or picked up, and it's centrally located. So that was a question from this morning. The other question I had, and I think this might be the last one for now, is kind of a general question, which is, has anyone looked into different communities who also have too many visitors in the summer, small communities, and have we had any kind of discussion or looking into creative ways that we could regulate the numbers of the visitors coming here, some creative way that would be polite, invite them back at a different time possibly, but that we somehow regulate the numbers of people coming, because it's our experience as people who've lived here for over 30 years that people that are visiting here, as well as residents here, don't enjoy the massive amount of visitors. And so what can we do to address that in our community, still be welcoming, still be hospitable, and yet somehow regulate the summer people numbers? And that would be visitors. The hotels don't have to be crammed, and the restaurants don't have to be crammed, and the sidewalks and the streets don't have to be crammed, because it's kind of like rats in a maze. And we really need to think about this for the summer months, that to do something differently is our feeling, and that we just need to find alternatives to that situation without redoing our streets or whatever. It seems like that might be something to think about.
All right, thank you, Jan. Yeah,
Yeah, great comments.
point.
Thank you.
Jan, I'll attempt to answer a couple of your questions if I can. So you asked about clear public comment space. I apologize if it wasn't very clear in the morning meeting, but we did have that slide with those discussion prompts, and that was really intended to be kind of the community's time to weigh in and really dig in and talk about things. Like Jeff mentioned this morning as well, we also have an online portal where there will be detailed opportunities for people to leave feedback. So that's definitely something that we want to share with the community far and wide if they weren't able to make it to one of these meetings today. So again, I apologize if that didn't come through clearly enough, but we certainly are trying to highlight opportunities for people to weigh in. As far as your question about the North End bus station, I was actually just looking it up on Google Maps, and I'll have to do more research to understand more about that stop. I'll admit I haven't looked into it very closely. But, I know that part of what we do with these kinds of plans typically is we try to really kind of bring forward existing plans. So, there's also the Sunset Empire Long Range Transit Plan. And we looked at some of those recommendations and essentially carried forward the ones that seemed like they could still be relevant. I believe that north bus stop was really intended more for some of the kind of dispersed neighborhoods further up north of Ecola Creek. So, I think we'd need to do a little bit more analysis to understand how accessible that stop at Les Shirley Park really is for those neighborhoods. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's adequate, and it's more just about communicating to folks that it's there and that it's available for them. So great comment. We'll definitely look into that. And as far as your comment about creative ways to regulate the numbers of visitors, I think you're absolutely spot on with that. I think we wrap this into the parking discussion a bit, and we'll get to that a little later in the presentation. Just because we are sort of charge really is the transportation system, so we need to relate it to a transportation topic. But I've seen lots of other small communities regulate tourist demand by through permitting systems essentially, and letting people know that, hey, if you want to come visit our natural resource, whether it's a park or a water body, there's limited parking capacity, there's limits on how much traffic and visitation we're willing to accept. So we need to implement some kind of a permitting system. So Jan, you probably saw some of those bullets in this morning's meeting, so we can talk more about that in a little bit. Lila, is your hand still up from the last time, or did you have another comment? And again, I apologize. I think you're muted again, so Jeff might need to unmute you.
No, I think my hand was up from last time. I do have a comment that relates to Jan's, but I don't know if this is the appropriate time or if I should wait.
Well, how about this, Lila? If you don't mind just holding on for a little bit, let me get through a few more slides and then let's try to get to that discussion.
That's good.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, Jeff, let's move it along and see if we can get through this section. And I think we're pretty close to the end anyway. Yeah, so I kind of already made this point, folks. I mean, really what I was trying to say here is, again, we looked at the network of facilities and capacity that the transportation system has today to try to understand what it would look like in the future. And in terms of parking, it's the same story, that there are no adopted plans to expand on or off-street parking right now. So any changes in future parking capacity would have to be driven by development. And again, that point about any future demands or constraints with regard to parking are more than likely going to come from tourist demand and not necessarily from local population growth. In terms of bicycle and pedestrian needs, just highlighting some of the future needs that we found. And again, these are very similar to the needs today because there aren't many planned improvements for the bicycle and pedestrian system. We expect that there will continue to be a lack of consistent and dedicated sidewalks and paths and bike lanes in certain parts of town. There's also a lack of a safe and comfortable north-south connection through town. One of the biggest barriers, of course, being the Cannon Beach curves. If you're on a bicycle or if you're walking on that, you're relegated to pretty narrow shoulders. And sometimes especially when you have tourists who maybe aren't used to driving through that segment, it can get a little dicey. Another big need that we've identified, of course, with this being a coastal town, is limited access to evacuation routes and assembly areas. Currently, access is good if you're in a vehicle, but if you're not, or if you're in a mobility device, like a wheelchair or something like that, it can be problematic getting to those assembly areas. So that's certainly something that we're also thinking about. And just generally, needs south of Sunset Boulevard. As you move further south into the city, there are fewer crossings, no sidewalks, narrow shoulders, and faster traffic. So we anticipate that these kinds of needs will persist into the future. All right, and I'm quite sure this is the last slide for this section. Just other future needs, transit. We heard from many community members that existing service is infrequent, and there are limited hours for both local and intercity travel. So that's certainly something that people will continue to ask for. In terms of freight, the economy will surely continue to grow, and with that, gradual demand over time for for freight. And I think even more so now in the aftermath of the pandemic with the explosion in e-commerce and food delivery and things like that. So one of the needs that we identified from all of that is that there are few designated loading zones in the city. So the city might consider strategically identifying a few other places where freight can support the local economy. And last, again, emergency response. As a coastal community, this is always going to be something that we need to address with our transportation system. So there will be a consistent need throughout the city for better access to assembly areas and evacuation routes, and then also access to the hospital in the seaside, which is the nearest big hospital.
Yeah,
So
I think Eddie also that came up frequently, or at least is also in the PAC conversations, is that the congestion during peak season and emergency response and the effect on that.
absolutely. And Jeff, I forget the gentleman's name, but I think he's the emergency manager for the city. And he was talking about the need for essentially 20-minute evacuation, in the event of a real emergency. And if you have peak congestion and high visitor season, that could be very problematic. So anyway, I guess the takeaway there is just that these bike and ped improvements are great for walking and biking and for health and for, just getting people out of their cars. But there's also a pretty direct connection to making the system more resilient and safer for everybody in the event of a real emergency. So folks, the next section was where I was going to talk about some of the alternatives that we've identified. So this is, I think, where you'll get really interested. But before we get there, I did want to stop for more comments or questions if anybody would like to do that. Lila, I don't know if you want to go now or if you want to hold until after our solutions, but the floor is yours if you want it.
And we also have Kathy Klesak.
Oh, great.
Kathy, do you have anything?
I do. I was waiting since you had called on Lila.
Let me see if Lila, I think she may just still have her hand up from previous, but we can ask her. Lila?
Am I unmuted now?
You are,
Yes.
yes.
I am happy to wait until you come up with your solutions. I just wanted to present one.
Okay, great.
And Lila, just for those that don't use Zoom so much, you have to take your hand down if you put one up. Just you can keep it up if you want, but just let you know.
Okay, I'll figure out how to do that.
Okay, go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, so in your future analysis, there wasn't any mention of the need for electric car or other vehicle charging stations. So electric scooters or bikes or things like that. So is that part of the future analysis as well?
Great question, Kathy. As a matter of fact, it is. In a few slides here, we actually talk about some of the ways that we thought about integrating those needs. So absolutely, great comment.
And we've got some feedback. If you're not speaking, could you please mute?
Sounds like someone's watching TV.
Okay.
All right, folks. Well, I just want to acknowledge that we only have 20 minutes left, so I would really like to get through some of these and get your feedback on them. So, Jeff, why don't we jump ahead for a second? And Randy, I saw your hand just go up.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead, Eddie, and we'll get to the questions at the end. Okay.
Okay, but Randy, just so you know, I see you. Okay, so just to summarize what we did building from the future analysis, essentially we did a bunch of brainstorming, right? So the big driver, of course, was community input, everything that we've heard from people today or up to today. Kathy, you mentioned you have an idea. I think that's great. We heard a lot of great ideas from our last public engagement session. And we really tried to take those ideas and test them out and see what was viable. The big driver, of course, for all of this is respecting the community and finding solutions that were appropriate in the village context. That's something that hasn't left our minds at all, despite all of this technical analysis. And the last thing I'll mention about the first bubble is that we really tried to identify a range of potential solutions. Jeff and I have talked about this at length, but one of the things that we really don't want to do is come in, especially myself, not being a Cannon Beach resident, as an outsider, and recommend to the city what to do. That I don't see that as what my role is. I think the best thing that we can do is provide the best possible information, support the city in hearing the voices of the community, and coming up with a menu of things that could work across a broad spectrum of cost and impact, and really leaving it up to the community to decide. So just need to say that that's very important. Next, we developed evaluation metrics. So basically, this is the way that we tested the solutions, and I won't go too much into that for the sake of time, but you can read it on the slide there. The third step was actually going ahead and testing those alternatives and applying that evaluation criteria and looking at some of those factors that we talked about previously, like volume over capacity, delay, intersection performance, et cetera. And then 4, going from that big bucket of ideas to a slightly smaller bucket and identifying the best performing alternatives to share with you all today. So the next slide, Jeff, is just to wrap this thing up. And step 5 is where we are right now. So basically, we're at that kind of second tier where we have some ideas. We haven't landed on any single solution. Again, we're presenting a range of options, and we really want to hear from the Public Advisory Committee and the community in general about which of these resonate with you and which you think would be a good thing to carry forward. So next slide, please, Jeff. So the first thing is intersection treatments. So I mentioned that one of the things that we found is that generally side street operations are delayed, and that can cause congestion, of course, but also some safety issues. And we looked at the full range of what you can do at an intersection, ranging from stop signs to traffic signals. And it was pretty apparent to us when we went out to the community that something like a traffic signal just would never work in Cannon Beach. It's not really appropriate for the village context. And there's other solutions out there. So really where we landed was kind of a lower cost, lower impact solution like 4-way stops along places like in downtown and on Hemlock, to higher cost, higher impact solutions like mini roundabouts. These are kind of newer ideas. You've probably heard of a typical roundabout, but these are actually very small roundabouts that can be adapted to Cannon Beach. And in both cases, these are tools that the city and the community could consider to address some of the congestion at intersections. And they would certainly yield different benefits, different trade-offs, but that's just to give you kind of a range of what's possible and what might work. Another idea was pedestrian plazas. So we know that the city's done something like this before. There is the farmers market, and we know that there's also been the 4th of July parade where, city will temporarily shut down the street and open it up to folks. And we think this can actually be a pretty good strategy for managing, very busy visitor demands during the summer. And certainly something that could be explored on a temporary or pilot basis. Another idea, and this one is probably a bit more of an eyebrow raiser, is something called Couplet Conversions, which basically takes 2 parallel streets with 2-way traffic and converts them to a pair of 1-way streets. You've probably seen this in other communities before, but the big benefit here is that it essentially splits the parking and traffic demand to 2 different streets. So it dramatically improves traffic operations, and we found that in our modeling. And in addition to that, because you're going from 2 lanes to 1 lane in each direction, you also open up more opportunities for parking, bicycle facilities, improving sidewalks, things of that nature. So it can be a beneficial strategy to look into, again, as a pilot or something that's implemented seasonally, to address peak visitor impacts. Next slide. And I apologize, folks, and I'm going fast. I just want to make sure we have time to talk about it. And, I don't think I'll spend time on this right now just for the sake of getting through the material, but just to give you a sense, these are not recommended configurations for Hemlock and Spruce. But, before taking this to the community, we had to test whether or not it would actually fit conceivably. So we came up with a few different configurations, but the takeaway here is that there's not one way to do this. There are many ways. And, if the city was to pursue something like this, it would require a lot more conversation with the community to land on an actual recommendation on how this would be implemented. But just to give you a sense that we do think it's possible in terms of the space that's out there right now. All right, and parking. So ideas for managing existing parking. One of the easiest things that we found working with our parking sub-consultant who's an expert on this stuff, was just striping the existing on-street parking spaces. Might sound kind of simple, but one thing that we found is that, tourists, especially if they don't come to Cannon Beach very often, might not totally know or respect how to park efficiently in downtown. So you have a lot of haphazard parking happening, and as a consequence of that, a lot of the space is eaten up and really has an impact on traffic, or excuse me, parking constraints in downtown. So by simply striping the on-street parking stalls that do exist in the city, you could see some pretty significant benefits in terms of more efficient use of what's out there today. Another idea, and this one came straight. Oh,
Eddie, I was just going to say, it also, as Owen said this morning, it serves as a target, but also, it tells you, it's also a signal of where you can park and can't park.
Right.
And that's often what we heard through the surveys, that there was a lot of areas where people didn't know where they could park and not. And so I think that that's also some of these striping and signage issues.
Right. And again, folks, I want to leave at least some time at the end, so I'm not going to read all of these, but the one that I will touch on real quick is remote parking lots and shuttle. This was another one that we heard directly from community feedback. We found in our previous analysis of existing capacity in the city that while the downtown segment certainly gets clogged up, there's actually a pretty good amount of off-street parking in lots throughout the city. So if the city were to move forward with some kind of a program to identify these remote lots and implement a shuttle to serve employees or visitors, that could be a really beneficial strategy for addressing parking in downtown. Let's skip these next few slides, Jeff. This is just getting at the range of solutions that we talked about for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. The takeaway there is just that, again, we wanted to look at a range, and we know that building sidewalks all over town is probably not going to be feasible or really consistent with people's idea of the villages. So we looked at lower cost, lower impact options like side paths, compacted gravel paths, simple markings on the street to let you know that bicycles are there, and things of that nature. And in terms of transit, let's just go to the next slide. I want to hit on the comment about electrification. One of the things that we talked about that's new, that wasn't in the previous Sunset Empire plan, was the exploration of this idea called mini mobility hubs. So basically kind of centralized places where you can access a variety of mobility options. So you might have regular parking there, bike parking, and you might also have things like electric vehicle charging, electric shuttles. You might have passenger pickup and drop off areas for services like Uber and Lyft. And all of this, could be programmed in a way to really try to take a substantial cut out of the traffic and congestion in downtown. So great comment. I forget who said that, but that was a good thing. Okay, sorry for rushing, but we made it to this point, which is the important part. But yeah, we want to hear from you. So which potential treatments are most appropriate for the village context? Again, that's how we've been thinking about this from the start. We don't want to recommend anything that's out of context or inappropriate. So that's very important to us, for us in terms of getting it right. And another kind of big picture question is, given limited funding, how should projects that address traffic be prioritized given other needs? So in other words, how important is the downtown parking and traffic issue compared to investments in walking and cycling, for example? And not that these are at odds with one another, but what's your idea on how the city should prioritize these kinds of improvements? And of course, is there anything missing? Is there anything that we just have not addressed today? Is there anything that you'd like to see more information about? Is there anything that we just got flat out wrong? Let us know. So I think that's enough of a frame up, but yeah, would love to spend the next 10 minutes hearing from everybody. So I think I'm going to pick on Randy first, because Randy, you put your hands up a few minutes ago. So I don't know if you need to. Okay, great.
Right.
I see
So
that.
I have probably like 2 comments and then 2 things to pass on.
Great.
I bicycle a lot from Tolovana to downtown, and I go up the S curves, I go down the S curves. I reviewed the material that Jeff had posted on the website, the charts and things. It's pretty hemlock spruce focused, and I'm giving I emailed him some inputs that basically say, let's get off of those. Let's do trails that are around the pond. Let's do Ocean Avenue. That multi-use path is good options, but let's try to reduce what we can do on spruce and hemlock. The second one is your traffic stuff looked like it was a representative day. The parking day that you did an analysis looks to be a big anomaly. I mean, there's been like 40 weekend days since that Saturday that you did the parking analysis. And that parking analysis was actually the coldest day in Portland of all the 40. So, whatever data that you got, my guess is it's heavily skewed to, it was probably a pretty light day in Cannon Beach. And then the second one, it probably goes along with Lila's, is, it seems like that the parking analysis didn't include anything about Tolovana Wayside and didn't include anything about Ecola State Park, which happen to be two of the largest parking blocks, related to the city. I understand they're not in the city, but, they are major contributors to the parking problems and the parking solutions. I looked through some of the parking, alternatives, and, there's two that I didn't really see anything written about at all. One of what's the impact to, or what's any recommendations towards right-of-way parking in neighborhoods. And another one is, what's the suggestion, what's the alternatives to parking on this Haystack Hill? That has got to be one of the most dangerous places in the city with the speeds and pedestrians and cars and bicycles. And, if it was my recommendation, I would say no parking, no pedestrian walking up there. And then, the last one is you had your diagram of, basically slanted parking, which makes sense in lots of places, although it also looked like, the recommendation is that's a back end slant as opposed to a pull in slant, which I've never seen before. And, just imagining, I have a hard time imagining how I would slide backwards into a parking spot and having pedestrians behind me, and not being able to see that there's somebody pulling out, 3 cars ahead. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Randy. That's a lot of really good stuff. Jeff, we should connect after the fact and make sure that I have any comments from Randy. And Randy, just so you know, I'm actually checking in with our parking team on Monday, so I'll definitely raise these ideas to them. But yeah, these are great comments, and I wish we had a little more time to unpack some of this stuff, but great recommendations. Really appreciate it.
So Lila is next.
I think I'm unmuted now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be really succinct. I have 7 things.
Great.
So the first is that there needs to be a 4-way stop with flashing stop signs specifically by Fresh Foods. People barrel through that intersection coming off 101. Nobody puts on their turn signals. It's a hazard waiting to happen. As a matter of fact, I always avoid that intersection and go to the very end of Cannon Beach because it's so horrifying.
Lila, sorry to cut you off. What intersection did you say that was?
By Fresh Foods,
By
Hemlock
Fresh Foods.
and Tolovana, Hemlock, Fresh Foods.
Gotcha.
That's at Warren Way, Eddie, and that's the intersection that council already approved, the 4-way stop, and that'll be going out to bid next year in the spring. The engineer is completing the plans, and Odot has signed off on it. So Lila's going to get her wish, except the flashing signs are not part of it.
Yeah.
But there will be much improved signage and marking with that change.
That's great.
So Merry Christmas, Lila.
Thank you very much. The flashing signs are really helpful because they make people aware that they need to stop. Okay,
Right.
so the second thing is, I really liked your contraflow recommendation. I'm not sure how it would work at Cannon Beach because we don't have 3 lanes anywhere, but the contraflow is worth pursuing. We just returned from Kauai and our first COVID, post-COVID trip.
Lucky
Anyway,
you.
yes. So for years, we used to go to the north end of Kauai to the beach there. And it was a free for all, just like it is in Cannon Beach. And when we went last week, they required ticket sales to go to the state park. So if we could collaborate with the state parks and have ticket sales for Ecola and Tolovana, that would deal with what Jan was talking about on, just a free for all people coming into the community.
Yeah.
The other thing they had in Kauai are traffic humps. They're not bumps. They're less bumpy, but they help people slow down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then somebody was talking about the S curves. So I've been thinking that if you could paint like vertical stripes on the, washable vertical stripes on the S curves so that people would park vertically, you could get more people with less confusion. And then, let's see. And then the final thing is, I know from working with one of my friends who needs transportation issues that the Sunset Transportation District has been having trouble retaining employees because they're requiring COVID vaccines. So they're quitting and they're eliminating transportation as a result. Now, I'm a big public health advocate, so that's not what I think is the right thing to do. But anyway, the point is people are having a harder and harder time using public transportation.
Yeah, thank you, Lila. Yeah, we heard that issue this morning at the PAC meeting, and yeah, it's a difficult situation right now, and hopefully, I did see the article saying that the experts believe we're seeing the peak of it, so we hopefully maybe find our way out of this. But yeah, it's going to be I think there's going to be issues finding workers throughout this community, not just for COVID issues, but affordable housing and others. So many things we got to face, but thank you for that advice.
So my biggest take home message is if we could work with state parks to issue tickets for people to go to Ecola or Tolovana, we would deal with the issue that Jan was talking about.
All right. Well, thank you. Eddie, you want to take the comment from Mary Beth?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mary Beth?
And by the way, folks, I apologize if you hear me typing away. I'm just capturing all the notes. I can share these afterwards too if anyone wants to see, but just so you know. Mary or Mary Beth?
He's unmuted, so hopefully. Maybe she'll call back in, or let me look and see. And I'll also just check to see if there's anybody else that may want to speak here.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through right now, seeing if I see any other little hands.
Okay, so Lila, let me just see if Lila, did you have anything else there?
I see Lynn Sinclair.
Okay.
I'm good. Thanks.
Oh, okay, thanks, Lila. So
Thank you,
let's go
Lila.
to, let's go to Lynn and then we'll go to Kathy after that.
There, am I open now? Yeah.
Yeah.
That you were talking, Lala was just mentioning, the state parks having prepaid permits to come to the park so we don't get an overflow. I'd like to see that for the town when we're looking at, parking decisions, that the entire town be permitted. And if you don't have to get a permit ahead of time, don't come out. That coming out and then having them circle because they didn't get a parking pass isn't going to solve our problem. They need to have it in advance.
All right, thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
And Kathy?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I think that the potential treatments that are appropriate for the village context, smaller and easily accessible is good. And I think that as far as prioritization, walking and cycling, making improvements to the safety and attractiveness of the walking and biking facilities will help with the parking management, because people will feel more comfortable parking in other places if the paths are clearly delineated and safe to walk and bike. And that's for people that are able to walk and bike, but also people that need more assistance. If the facilities are paved and more accessible and fit ADA standards, then our town is more welcoming as a whole. And I also agree with the parking permit. If there's a parking reservation system, then that just reduces the larger amount of people just in general circling. Your idea about the uncoupling the couplets and making them one-way couplet on spruce and hemlock, I think is a great idea, because it also then spreads out the walking areas, because more businesses will find it more attractive to be on spruce rather than only hemlock being the walking area, being the business street.
All right, and now Mary Beth is back on, and so let's see if she can chime in now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
I can hear you,
can.
Mary Beth.
Okay.
Thanks for hanging in there.
Thank you. I had to run up to the laptop because my mic doesn't work on that computer for some reason, only on Zoom. However, so my thought is, I haven't heard a lot of conversation about a north-south walking and biking path that would go from the south end of town all the way to the north end of town. I would love to walk down to Fresh Foods or to the south end or bike, but I don't feel safe on the street biking. And I can go on the beach, but if it's a high tide or a stormy day, I can't. It's not safe. So it would be really nice to have a path that was contiguous all the way down. And there are paths that go a good distance, but right now the path spits you out at the curves, and you have to negotiate the curves before you can even think about getting off the main road again. So I'm wondering what you have planned in that arena, and also the paths that I'm talking about are only pedestrian. You cannot go through the Haystack Gardens path on a bike. You can hardly walk it right now. There's so many trees down.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Mary Beth. That was brought up many times in our surveys and responses, but also in the past. It's in the master plan or the original bike ped transportation plan. So it is something that we've seen, and we have it as one of our alternatives there, a couple different scenarios on helping that. So I would suggest next step for anyone is to please go out there and look at those alternatives documents that are on the cannonbeachtsp.com website. Under the materials page, you'll see documents and with different scenarios on a lot of these things that we spoke about tonight very briefly. They're covered in that. And the one thing that we want to direct everyone that's on this call and anyone that you can reach and contact that are interested in this issue is that next up will be an open online interview, online open house that's interactive that will have many of these questions in survey form, and then looking at these kind of big picture items saying, what are your preferences, and start leading us from alternatives to prioritization and preferences.
Just to piggyback on that, if I may,
Sure.
those walking paths would also help for evacuation during emergency, because they could go past the assembly sites. And currently you thread your way through the woods. Again, it's not a maintained path to get to the assembly site. And that's the main way to get, if you're not on the highway, which you don't want to be, to get to the assembly site from downtown. All of downtown goes along this wooded path. So that's just another issue that I see with that.
And Mary Beth, did Rick Hudson make you say that? That's all I want.
No, he did not. I have walked that path many times, and it's a lovely wooded path, but I'm thinking about some of the folks that I would have to be piggybacking down it to get them to the assembly site when I'm at work and an emergency arises. So that was pure self-interest there.
All right, thank you.
And Mary Beth, the last thing I'll tag on to that is, first of all, great comment. That north-south connection is super important. And like Jeff said, we heard a lot about it and tried to address it. So in the memo, the alternatives analysis memo, basically what we did is we looked at the parks master plan that had some recommended trail segments, and then looked at ways that we could essentially connect those to create a contiguous north-south connection that would actually sync up with those assembly areas. So great comment, and we'd love to, I mean, I would personally really love to hear whether or not that's the right kind of connection that you're thinking of, because it would involve some on-street segments, or if we're talking about, you know, a fully separated trail system. So those are the kinds of comments that would really help us kind of refine this and land on something that the community can get behind. So thanks for your comment.
Yeah, I think that my response would be, it depends on the street segment, how safe that is.
Of course,
I know
yeah.
currently there's a section of Spruce that is very low traffic. You do have to cross Sunset, but there is a crosswalk there. And that to me doesn't seem like a problem. There are other areas of town where a street segment could be a little challenging. But I will take a look at the documents.
All right,
take a look, and you know, we coupled it with some other improvements like crossings. So you know, hopefully it adds up to something that seems feasible. But yeah, we'll definitely continue to refine it based on feedback like yours. So thank you. Jeff, do you see any other hands? Just kind of doing a quick scroll.
Let's just see if Lynn has something else to say.
No, I just don't know how to do this.
Okay, all right, thanks, Lynn.
You're doing great.
Yeah, no,
Well,
I don't see anyone else. You want to move it? Do you want to do any more slides, or is that it for
Well,
that?
yeah, I was going to say, Jeff, maybe we can just go to the last slide, and then if folks want to
Okay.
stick around, we can certainly hang out and chat.
Okay, yeah, so the next steps, like I had mentioned earlier, you can always reach me at my email address, adams@ci.cannon-beach.or.us. But we are also going to be launching an online open house that's set for September 30th, but all of October, we will have it up and running. We'll be getting the press releases out and push to get the word out on the street
Who knows what's going to happen?
that get to direct people to this open house so that we can get the feedback on these alternatives. And then we'll move into the preferred alternatives in the winter. And so, like I said, go to the website if you can and read through these materials. Feel free to reach out to me. Some of these will, like Eddie said, we've been taking notes. I've been taking notes. Eddie's been taking notes. We'll collect those. We'll get back with like Randy and some of these longer questions and direct him on in the materials where he can find some of the information that he's looking for.
Yeah, and Jeff, the only thing I would add is that, you know, the document that you'll all have access to now is a draft. So we'll refine that draft and reflect everything that we heard tonight. So your voice is definitely not being just heard and documented and put away somewhere. We will absolutely incorporate it into our work. So again, just wanted to thank everyone for being open with us and sharing some great ideas. So really appreciate it.
All right. Randy has got one last comment, it looks like.
Sure, and I'm supportive of the couplet type of approach. I've spent lots of time up in Sandpoint. That's what they converted their downtown kind of area, and having 2 lanes going north and 2 lanes going south. I could easily see 2nd Street becoming a freight loading zone, and when there's no trucks there, it's basically a pedestrian plaza.
All right.
That's right, Randy. We actually looked at converting 2nd into a pedestrian street precisely for that reason. So you nailed it on the head.
All right. Well, thank you. And Eddie, you have anything else?
No, again, I just wanted to thank everybody. I think it was a good discussion, and you know, we're certainly not done yet. Like Jeff was saying, we're at the heart of it. So I think this is where it gets really interesting, and you know, we really need folks like you to keep coming out and letting us know how we can make this better. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And let's all hope to see each other in person at the next one of these. But really appreciate everybody being on. Spread the word to get people onto that online. And remember that this is being recorded and taped, so you can always, if somebody did miss it and they wanted to see it, it's available on our website. Just go under the agendas and search for that meeting date, and you'll pull it up and it's right there. Okay. Thank you. And everybody have a good evening.